On today's Join Us in France, the newly renovated and wonderful Rodin Museum in the 7th arrondissement in Paris. This is Join Us in France, episode 102.
Oh my God.
Yes. The numbers get bigger.
They get bigger.
Hello, I'm Annie.
And I'm Elyse.
And Join Us in France is a podcast about all things French. And today we are going to be talking about
the Musée Rodin,
Yes.
and about Mr. Rodin as well.
Yes, love
great
the place.
sculptor.
I haven't been in years, but I haven't been since they renovated it.
Yes, and I have.
You have. So that's why we wanted to do a special episode
Right.
about this. Okay.
I was there just after the reopening.
Yes. So what have you been up to? We got to do some news.
Okay. Well, no, you're purposely putting me on the spot here. Okay.
Yes, I am.
What have I been up to? Well, I don't know, my usual things.
Well, you did go to Montpellier recently.
I did go to Montpellier, which of course will bring us to an eventual new podcast in the month of March.
Yes.
Went to see a absolutely gorgeous old church that used to be part of an abbey that's right on the coast. So we'll talk a little bit about Mediterranean coast. And it's something I had never seen before. And
Cool.
actually, quite honestly, it was very nice to see the sea because here we are in the middle of the land.
Yes. Yeah. No sea here.
Landlocked,
Yes.
as they say. And so that was very lovely. That was for
Yeah.
2-3 days. That was a very nice little side trip.
Yes, that's great.
And before then, where I get to we talked since I was up in Paris, as I guess so. But
Yeah.
well, whatever. And I don't know, just buying, going to a couple of my favorite bookstores and to-dos and, buying a couple of things that are more nostalgic than anything else, like a couple of David Bowie albums.
Oh, yes.
Because I really liked his music and him.
Yes.
And checking in on my my mystery book section because I'm always up for reading books that are written by people
Yes.
from all over the world.
She loves her mystery books.
I love my mystery books, and they can come from any country in the world. And one of the things that's really nice here in France that's not the case in the United States is that there are lots and lots of books that are translated from languages other than just English. So you have really writers
Indian
from
authors
all over.
and Chinese authors.
Right, exactly. I mean,
cetera,
everywhere.
yeah.
I just read one, actually, that was very, very good. That's an Israeli mystery writer who is more along the lines of they're more legal thrillers a little bit than anything else. But they're very good because they were about modern social issues.
Cool.
And so, I love doing things like that.
Yeah.
That's my discovery time.
Yes. I've been telling her she should write some mystery novels.
I will, as long as you allow me to kill off a couple of tourists.
That's fine. You can kill tourists, but don't kill any dogs.
Well, that's an inside joke between the two of us at this point. Yes. Okay, we have a deal. I can kill off a couple of nasty tourists. Maybe I'm not sure what country they'll come from, but no dogs.
No dogs.
I won't touch the dogs.
Or cats. You don't have to kill cats either.
Certainly not
Certainly
cats.
not.
Certainly not.
Exactly. Okay. We're good then.
We're good. All right. Now that we've gotten this nonsense over with.
Yeah, and I've had a couple of Polish exchange students at home, and it's always fun to have people at home who know nothing about. This is their first visit
Outside
to France.
right.
Well, not outside of Poland, but
to France.
and it's always very fun to see what they pay attention to, what surprises them.
Do they speak French?
No, English.
Oh, English. Okay.
Yeah, they did the exchange because my daughter takes Russian, and these Polish kids take Russian. So the idea was that they were going to converse in Russian. Well, that's
guess
not
not.
happening.
No.
I have heard zero Russian going on.
Lots of nice English and slang, I imagine, right?
Yes, there's a lot of English, and we lucked out because the girl who's staying with us, her English is very good. So there you go.
Well, that's good. It's fun.
Yeah, it's fun to see.
Be interesting to get their impressions of how different France is from Poland.
Yes, and she brought us all sorts of treats. A lot of them are very similar to what we have here, though.
Really?
It's culturally, I don't think it's that different. She at every meal she keeps telling us that Polish people eat a lot of meat.
That's true.
Yes,
that's true,
and that's going to be a problem because my daughter's decided to go vegetarian again.
Yeah. Well,
I think this time she's getting more and more determined. 17 now, almost 18, and now she's like, I'm not having that. I'd rather be hungry.
Okay.
I'm like, oh, okay.
Well, that's her choice.
Yeah, she started this when she was maybe 10. She wanted to be a vegetarian.
Oh, that long ago?
Yeah, that long ago, and it lasted about a week. And then she saw a big old billboard that had an ad for a hamburger place.
She went.
She said, I want a hamburger. Yeah.
I know some people who have been off and on vegetarians all their lives. I think there's phases, and sometimes your body says it's a time when you can be, and then it can be 6 months, a year, or whatever later, and you just go, I need something else.
You know, and I see nothing wrong with it, so I'm going right along with it. I think when she goes to Poland in March, she might have a hard time.
I think she will.
Finding food that she will eat. But
she'll have a lot of potatoes.
Exactly. Potatoes and apples, I guess. I don't know.
She'll tell you whatever.
I will report on the podcast about what's happening.
Well, that it's a totally other subject than what we're talking about today. But it is true that there are some countries that make it easier to be vegetarian than others. And it turns out that I don't know about Poland at all, but it is true that the Northern European countries are much more used to having people who are vegetarian than the Latin southern countries, strangely enough. And Spain is even harder than France because there's so much that's based on either fish, seafood, or pork, hams and things like that. And it's very interesting that the northern countries seem to have accommodated that better, at least for the moment. But
and France is getting a little bit better.
Yeah.
It's still not great, but we'll get there eventually.
Eventually.
I think.
All right. Talking about meat, let's talk about Rodin.
I don't know if was he meaty?
Well, he was meaty, yes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, he was meaty. He was big and very, very muscular, very, very strong. If you ever see, and we'll find some pictures of him, even as most of the pictures you will find now these days are pictures of him more or less as an old man. He had this incredibly long white beard.
Yes.
Which was very typical, actually, of the time.
Yes, at the time.
Monet had a big beard.
Yes.
Clemenceau, who was, they were all people who were friends of his. They all had beards. And it was really this kind of old, long beard, like in a fairy tale type story, But, he was certainly not, he was a hefty ball of energy his entire life, and that obviously is partly what made his work so fabulous in a sense. So I kind of thought I wanted to talk about the museum and then about him. It doesn't really matter which way, but maybe we should start by talking about the museum itself.
Oh, sure,
bit, okay?
sure.
So as we mentioned, it has just reopened after being closed for almost 2 years for remodeling. Now, the thing about the Rodin Museum, there are enormous numbers of museums in Paris, and it is considered to be a relatively small museum compared to some of the biggies, Orsay, Louvre, even the Picasso Museum are much, much bigger than the Rodin Museum. But it is one of the most beautiful museums, and part of the reason for that is because it's not just a building, it's also a huge park.
Yeah, the gardens are very nice.
The gardens are absolutely gorgeous, and they are part of the history, and the history actually is very interesting, so I thought I'd begin with that.
Yeah.
First of all, it is on the Rue de Varenne, and it is in the 7th arrondissement, which means it is one of the chicest, most luxurious neighborhoods of Paris, and right on the street, a little further down, are a couple of the ministry buildings.
Right.
So it is in a very, very upper class, as the French would say, huppé area.
Yes, huppé.
Huppé. And it is across... Yes, it is across the big boulevard from Les Invalides.
Yeah,
and the Napoleon's tomb. So it's a gorgeous, not
very
quite
grand.
so congested old section. Most of the mansions that are in that area, that includes the Hôtel Biron, which is where the museum is, are actually from the early 1700s, from the 18th century, in the gorgeous limestone, the beautiful limestone. It was a rich neighborhood from the beginning, and it started in the 1700s being a kind of the close-in outskirts of Paris for very rich people who were noble people who wanted to build a house and have a big garden. And that's really how the building began. One of the first person to build it who had bought this piece of land was a man who was a financial person for Louis XIV at the end of Louis XIV's reign. I don't even know if he was a nobleman. He had a particle, as they say, but he was mostly just very rich.
Okay.
And he died before the building was finished, but his widow, who obviously had other residences, decided that she should finish the building. And what she did was she actually rented it out on a lifelong lease. How's that for a long-term lease?
Nice.
To a countess.
Oh.
And that person, in turn, when she was going to, I guess when she was very old, she sold it to a marquis named Biron.
Okay.
Who became a maréchal, which means a high 3 or 4 star general.
Yeah,
it's one of the
high-ranking
high-ranking general. And that is when it got its name. That is still its name, the Hôtel Biron, named after this man. And what he did was he took this absolutely gorgeous 18th century classical mansion. It's not a palace. It's a chateau. It's a mansion.
Yeah.
Right? He bought the land behind it. There was just a little garden around it. And he bought a huge piece of the land and turned it into this absolutely exquisite garden park. Where we've had this whole conversation about what's a park and what's a garden. It's actually a garden, I guess. And it has a part of it is a French garden, which means it's very geometric and with a beautiful perspective from the back steps of the building. And then part of it is off to one side. He made a little bit of an English garden with a bunch of beautiful old trees, and you kind of wend your way through. And it has 2 wading pools. And that basically was the way it stayed right through into the beginning of the 1800s. Mm-hmm. And then it was bought up by some other rich noble person. Mm-hmm. And it stayed in the hands of very, very, very wealthy individuals, and it was a private home until, for some reason, and it has to do with politics, but it doesn't really make any difference for our story, until 1811, at which time it was given over to a group of sisters to create a school, a convent school for young ladies.
Okay.
And they were the Sisters of the Sacred Heart.
Okay.
And so believe it or not, from 1811 until 1904, that's a long time. That's almost 100 years.
Yeah, it was a school.
It was a school. And so what they did was they kept the grounds, which they didn't use. It was left basically to go wild. And they basically tore down or reused the inside to make it into a school.
Right, so they needed bigger rooms, they needed classrooms.
So what's left of the original building, which is absolutely gorgeous, of course, is the magnificent, majestic staircase.
Okay, yes.
The beautiful, beautiful marqueterie on the floors. The wood floors are there to die for.
Yes.
And some of the beautiful Rococo molding on the ceilings and the things like that, so you can see the elegance of the building itself.
Yeah.
And then in 1904, again for political reasons, they were... their order was disbanded. And that was the reason why. It was in 1904. There was the absolute separation of church and state.
That's right.
And so their school, which obviously probably had been getting some kind of money, I'm not sure of the details of it, they were basically closed down as a school.
Right.
And the sisters, the nuns, went somewhere else.
Right, because in 1904, the state stopped giving any funding to the church. And
Right. So what happened was, and this is why the story is really a great story, 1904, the building is left empty. The garden is left to grow wild. And a couple of artists, a couple of people have heard of, Matisse, a crazy dancer named Isadora Duncan that I bet a lot of people have heard of.
Yes.
And a poet named Rilke, who's Austrian. Guess what? They squat the building.
They squat the building.
They squat the building.
Wow.
Hey, squats are not new, right?
They were probably very young.
They were very young, right? Apparently, even Jean Cocteau, who must have just been teenager at the time, with a bunch of other people. Anyway, what happened was...
It was a squat.
It was a squat. A squat. And Rilke, who had become secretary to Rodin, he told Rodin about this building because Rodin lived and had a huge studio in Meudon, which is on just on the outskirts of the city of Paris. Mm-hmm. It's the other place where he officially resided. And so he was already a relatively old man. He was already in his 60s by this point. Mm-hmm. And so he came to see this building, and he thought that it would be great if he could use some of the rooms, particularly on the ground floor, because the real thing was that he wanted to use the garden to place some of his big sculptures.
Right.
And so he negotiated with the government so that it became what today we would call an official squat.
Wow.
So that nobody would throw them out.
Okay.
Because, in fact, the building was supposed to be taken over by one of the ministries and used for one ministry that very, I don't know.
For offices or whatever.
Yeah, right. It was not even a very interesting ministry. I mean, it wasn't something very elegant or anything like that. And so...
the Ministry of Escargot Collection.
Yeah, it was like the Ministry of, like, Construction or something. Oh, God,
we have a lot of ministries
We have a lot of ministries.
We still have, like... I know this is fresh in my mind because the French president just...
renamed.
Changed all his ministers. He has, like, 34, 35... Ministre d'État, which means,
And then they have the sub ones, and the
it's ridiculous.
assistant ones.
We have, like...
Lots of them, right?
Way too many.
Anyway, so what happened was that the government basically said, okay. After all, by that point, Rodin was famous. Matisse was very famous. So they allowed them to rent the space. So Rodin rented the ground floor in this beautiful mansion. And what is interesting is that there are photos, because by this time, of course, there was a lot of photography of him relatively old, doing small pieces and a lot of drawings in this house where he was doing the big pieces out at the other place where he had this massive foundry and studio and everything else. And he lived there part-time, but he worked there really until his death in 1917. And what happened was...
So it must be a big enough house that he had the studio and apartments.
Well, he didn't really... He would sleep in his studio space. I mean, this is what artists do, he didn't have an apartment to live in. His house was the house in Meudon. But he had...
Okay, but he had like a
three big rooms, and he obviously had space. That's what the artists always did. They always had a kind of studio bed that they could just sleep on because they didn't have 9 to 5 hours,
Sure.
They would work. And he had Rilke, who had an office space, who did his own writing, his own poetry, and it was his secretary. And there were these other artists, including Matisse, who had become very good friends with him, who also kept this as a space to work in, but it wasn't their primary studio space.
Okay.
But it was Rodin who decided that he really loved this house and this space in the garden in the back. And so what happened was that as he was getting old and he realized that he was born in 1840. So he's 71 in 1911. And he made an agreement. He went and petitioned the government to allow him to stay in this house until his death. Mm-hmm. And then a couple of years later, when they said, well, we don't know, he was already famous enough that he put a lot of pressure on the government to buy up the building.
Okay.
But not to assign it to a ministry. And then what he did was, a couple of years later, knowing that he was getting ill and that he probably was not going to live much longer, he went and he made a deal with the government. And he said, if you give me this building and garden, I will bequeath to the government all my major works, all of my own personal collection of art, all of my library, all of my drawings. If you turn this into the Rodin Museum and you put my major sculptures in the garden. And so in 1916, 1 year before his death, the government passed a law or rule or whatever it is that they actually do to approve turning this building, the Hotel Biron, into officially the Rodin Museum.
Okay.
So it is a very old one-person museum.
Yeah.
And when he died, just like with Hugo, maybe not quite as much, but it was a huge, big deal that when Rodin died. He died at the age of 77 in 1917.
Yeah.
And there was a huge there was a huge turnout for people coming for the funeral. And the museum officially opened in 1919.
Okay. So.
And it has been the Rodin Museum ever since.
Yeah.
So what do you have? You have a building that houses the smaller works.
Yes.
That is this magnificent, magnificent mansion from the early 1700s. Mm-hmm. You have a park that is 3 hectares, which is 7.5 acres, or maybe a little bit more even, that is absolutely exquisite, that is filled with all of the major pieces. And I'll mention a few of them because I think a lot of people have seen them.
Yeah.
Now, the pieces outside in the garden are obviously all in bronze.
Yeah.
And Rodin was not someone who insisted that a work had to be unique, because when you make a work in bronze, it requires an enormous amount of elaborate steps to follow. And there's a casting to make it into bronze.
Yes.
So he, and because he had a sense of pedagogy, he really did. He said, I will allow 7 or 8 of each of these major works to be made.
Yeah.
Because they are, in fact, there's a lot of them in the United States, as a matter of fact, and particularly in San Francisco. And he said afterwards we can break the molds for these.
Okay.
But at least there will be 7 or 8 of each of these. And while these molds still exist, after I'm gone, young sculptors can come and work to see what it's like to work on this kind of sculpture and learn the techniques.
Huh.
So because he always had assistants from the time he actually was a relatively fairly successsul sculptor.
Yeah, he was more like the old style Renaissance Italian artist that would have actually a factory. I mean, a whole process of people who would be assigned specific tasks, and some of it was repetitive.
But they all did. I mean, at that time, sculptors did. I mean, to be honest, I think some of the sculptors and people who do that kind of work, even today, they have assistants. It's just that they don't really talk about it. From the Renaissance through to the time of Rodin, it was not something you hid. You talked about the fact that you had assistants, that you had people who learned from you, who worked with you, and things like that.
Who participated.
Yeah, who participated. So basically, that's the history of how this became the Rodin Museum. Mm-hmm. Now, the building has been renovated several times, but the most recent renovation just reopened in January of 2016.
Yeah, it's very recent.
And it's wonderful. And before that, what had happened was that the floors were starting to break, literally, and the building was musty, and it was very difficult to get a sense out of the collection of what you saw inside. So basically, the museum is composed of really 3 parts. You have the garden park, which is filled with the massive works and is a magnificently beautiful, beautiful, beautiful garden, and now has a wonderful little cafe where you can get a coffee, a tea, a very nice soup or salad. It's a lovely place. If you go there in the morning, for instance, the museum opens at 10, you can spend an easy 2 hours with everything and then have a little bite to eat there, or the other way around, go there and have lunch or coffee and then go and visit the collection afterwards. Then there's the main building, which now, thankfully, now that they've redone it, not only did they fix up the floors and all of that, but they reorganized it so that it's extremely well done, and it's in chronological order. So that you see the development of his art, and you see all of the most important of his pieces, but most of the pieces that are inside are not that huge, except for a couple of them. And the 2 or 3 that are inside.
The Kiss is inside.
The Kiss is inside. Yeah. The Walking Man, which is one of my favorites, is inside.
Yep.
And the Kiss, the Walking Man, and there's a very beautiful piece called The Wave, which is, and the Cathedral, which is actually a sculpture of hands that's coming out of a piece of stone.
Yes.
And of course, one of the things is that he was extremely inspired by Michelangelo. And when he went to Italy, he was already in his 30s. He was not someone who appreciated what was the typical kind of art of the 19th century, the very academic, very polished, very stiff kind of art. And it was a revelation for him to go to Italy, but specifically to see the sculpture of Michelangelo, who, of course, revolutionized sculpture by having people and bodies come out of masses of marble and left completely unfinished, so that you have this sense of emergence of the actual body, as it literally seems to come right out of the rock, out of the rock, you know. And that, of course, is one of the things that really inspired him for his later works. And then something that was done in the beginning of the just about 2003, there was a chapel that was on the property that was built in the 19th century by the sisters in this convent in a neo-Gothic style. And so what they did about 15, 20 years ago is they changed it. They cut off the top of it. They left the bottom part, which is still neo-Gothic, but they flattened out and made a very modern roof on top. And they turned it into the temporary exhibit space, the gift shop, the entranceway. It's very elegant. It's just gorgeous stone that's all been cleaned up. So you have this, it's called the chapel, but it's actually now this mix of all of these other things.
So it's the entrance and exit.
It's the entrance exit.
Yeah, because
exactly.
all the big museums, you enter. Right. I mean, you exit through the gift shop, obviously.
Right, exactly. And so you come in through there, and then you go into the gardens, and from the gardens, the ticket is for the gardens and the big basic mansion part, and then you wander around and you do what you want. And it's very nice because...
Do you remember the price of the ticket?
I believe it's $8.
Okay.
I think it's $8, but I'm not exactly sure.
Something like that.
The truth is, since I don't have to pay, I don't pay attention.
Oh.
Shame on me. Being a guide, I don't have to pay. At least not in national museums, and Rodin is a national museum. Yeah, right. I don't even have to stand online, to tell you the truth, you know. Anyway, but it's really beautiful. And so I was delighted, absolutely delighted, because you have in the park gardens, you have the major big pieces. You have the Thinker.
Yes.
Which is fabulous. And of course, is the one place that...
Very large.
Nobody, including myself, can resist having a picture taken with the Thinker.
Of course.
Just the way it is.
Who wouldn't do that? I mean, you have to. You just,
And then you have two other pieces that are, to me, probably the most fabulous things that he did. One is the Burgomasters of Calais, which has a whole story attached to it, which is a fabulous sculpture. It's a sculpture of 6 men who have ropes around their necks and who are actually prisoners, and they look like they're in rags, and they're obviously they've been captured and they're being led off somewhere. And the actual work was commissioned at the end of the 1800s, after the war with Prussia. The Prussians had invaded France and actually took Paris. So in 1870, 1871, there was a terrible war, and there was this famous commune in Paris. And basically, the country was almost entered into a civil war because there were people, again, like what happened not very much long after, who were ready to comply with these invaders and others who considered that this was the last straw, being taken by the Prussians. And of course, this was after 80 years from the revolution on of constant upheaval. So starting in the 1880s, which was the beginning of actually peaceful times in France, there was this very big push artistically, on top of everything else, to give people a sense of patriotism. And among the things that were done, because it involved artwork a lot, it's very interesting. The city of Calais, which had gone back and forth between English hands and French hands for centuries and centuries and centuries, decided to commission a sculpture by Rodin in honor of the pride of its heroes. And the heroes in Calais refer back to the 100 Years' War with the English, not with the Prussians.
Oh, okay.
Because in the 1300s, Calais was fought over and basically taken over by the English, and it was kept for almost 200 years until it was taken back at the time of Joan of Arc by the French. So they asked him to do something that would represent the heroism of the French. And so what he did was, in order to make sure that people didn't get too, maybe there was a little bit of sensitivity about current events, he pushed it back to the time, medieval times. And so his representation of this period is the story that is supposed to be true of the 6 city councilmen who gave themselves over as prisoners to Edward III, the King of England, to save the people of the city, the walled, fortified city of Calais. And this is in the 1300s. Okay. So this is what Rodin did. But, of course, this is Rodin. This is not academic sculpture. This is Rodin sculpture. And Rodin sculpture, this is why I said he's meaty. It's a perfect word for him. He was a passionate man. And his passion comes out in the way he shows the human form. Yeah. And in the case of all of these big sculptures, like the ones in the garden, one of the things you notice right away is how enormous the hands are.
Yes.
And the feet.
Yes, they're very disproportionate.
Very, very disproportionate.
Yeah.
There's a power in them. And, of course, this is like looking at the power of his own hands as a sculptor.
It's like strong and angry.
Strong and angry.
And you can see it in the hands.
Yeah. And, of course, the other thing is that the faces are all very realistic. He used real people as models, obviously. Yeah. They're tortured looking. Yes. They're very realistic looking. Rodin is considered to be the father of modern sculpture in France, and maybe, in fact, in the Western world. And when people say that he's the father of modern sculpture, what they're talking about is that his sculpture expresses strong personal emotion. Yes. It's very expressive.
Even if you know nothing about it, which is what was my case when I first went to see this museum years ago, I was just blown over.
Right.
Just such strong messages.
Yes.
You know, if you sit and look at these pieces and you just think, what is this about? It's like, it'll blow you over. It's very strong.
It's very strong.
Very, and beautifully done and massive in a way. Not everything is massive, but a lot of his more famous pieces are quite large.
Right. Interestingly enough, the most famous pieces tend to be the biggest ones.
Yeah.
Some of the small pieces are absolutely exquisite.
Yes.
But perhaps it's because the biggest ones are the ones that have been made in bronze. And so they have they've been reproduced.
And they're more a public.
Right.
But, you know, if it's a bronze, it's in public.
It's in public.
Out,
exactly.
And everybody gets a chance to see it, whether or not, you know, if you walk past it, you will see it. And they've really put a mark in my, you know, understanding of sculpture. Yeah. Really. It's
fab.
Unique.
I mean, you can sense his passion, his power, his, probably egoism, but his imagination and his ability to convey all of these things. Now, the 2 other pieces that when you go in through the entranceway and into the garden, you have the big building in front of you. The Burgomasters of Calais, along with 2 other pieces, are off to your left in front of the building. The Thinker is off to your right in this beautiful little kind of maze of hedges. But 2 of the other major pieces, one that I just think is unbelievably incredible, is the Gates of Hell.
Right.
And the Gates of Hell has a wonderful story as well. He was already famous. This is in the end of the 1880s. And he was commissioned to create these doors. They're doors, 2 doors, for the brand new building that was supposed to be built to be the home of the decorative arts in Paris. So he conceived of this based on Dante's Hell.
Yes.
And it is a massive piece that's 8 by 7 meters.
Right.
All in bronze with these figures in the different layers that come out at you in this. It's almost incredible to imagine how this could have been made and sculpted in bronze, because the figures are not even relief figures. They come out literally directly at you. Yes. I mean, in the different forms.
You just have to go see it.
They emerge.
Just have to see it.
I mean, the creatures. So this is the story. The building got canceled. They didn't build this building. I mean, they did eventually, but at the time when he was commissioned to do this sculpture. So what happened was, he literally did not cast the door. It was cast after his death.
Oh, is that right?
Because it took him from when he was commissioned to do it. He worked on it off and on for the rest of his life, which meant for another something like 20-something years, 25 years. And then, this is what's brilliant, because it's the opposite of what you could imagine. Most artists, painters, sculptors, whatever, they do small individual studies, and then they eventually put all these things together if they're making a big, very complicated composition.
Yeah.
Rodin, it was exactly the opposite. He conceived of this with drawings. Now, it happens that Rodin's drawings are absolutely exquisite. His watercolors are exquisite. You won't see very many of them there, but I have seen them, and they are magnificent to look at. And what he did was, because he was constantly working on this piece, he eventually took individual sections and turned them into separate individual sculptures on a large scale. So one of the things that you have, for instance, is that right in front of the gates of hell, there is a life-size or bigger than life-size sculpture of what are called the three shadows, but it's actually the three fates. And they are taken from the little figures that are up on the top of the door.
Okay.
So he worked his way backwards by taking individual sections of this door that he was working on over so much time, and inspiring himself to turn them into individual separate sculptures along the way.
Yeah. Oh, wow.
And there's a whole bunch of them in different sections through the park. And then even some small pieces of it inside the museum. And because the building was canceled and the commission, therefore, was canceled, he just literally kept working on it. And he used to work in plaster a lot. Now, he did a lot of sculpture in marble. And there's a huge kind of open glass, it's covered in glass, but there's a studio that runs the wall of one side of the park behind the building that houses some of his pieces that are in marble. He did a lot of portraits of real people, his friends.
Portraits in marble.
He did portraits. He did Hugo. He did Victor Hugo. He did Balzac. I mean, he did all these people.
Yeah.
And they're in this enclosed space so that you can see them, and they don't have to worry about the weather involving.
Yeah, because that can't go outside, obviously.
But the plaster pieces are inside the building. There's some of the plaster pieces. And, of course, the way he worked on this doorway is by originally doing it in plaster.
So do you happen to remember, since you were there recently, if they let you touch any of this?
No, you never touch.
Not even outside?
Oh, yeah. Well, it says, okay, listeners out there, every single sculpture on the base, on the bottom, says do not touch.
Yeah.
Now, this is the deal. We all want to touch.
Yes.
The problem is that eventually the oil and the acids in our hands will eventually work on eroding the bronze. So you're not supposed to touch.
Right.
What you do when nobody's looking, I am not responsible for. But you really, seriously, the problem is it's not one person.
Yeah.
It's that if everybody does it, it's really, it is interesting because having done a little bit of studying of restoration and everything, you know, we do have acids and oils in our hands.
Yeah, we do.
And that is the real reason why we're not supposed to touch things.
Yeah.
It's for the same reason. Why do we not do photos of paintings with flash? It's because the flash will eventually fade the colors in a painting.
Yeah.
And so it really is one of those situations.
Which is because it would be so fun to just close your eyes and touch these things.
Of course it would.
Yeah.
So you have all of the variations of his bronze sculptures. Oh, and the other one, which is on the other side, it's one that I also like a lot, is Balzac. Now, Balzac, of course, is a very famous writer from the 19th century.
Yes.
Very, very important French writer. Was not a very handsome man.
Nope. Big nose.
Very, very strange face, and he looks odd, like he has a very big head. Interestingly enough, this is one sculpture where Rodin gives him a huge head. And you don't really see, as you see in many of the other sculptures, this dominance of the hands. Even when he does beautiful, sensuous sculptures of women, the hands are always big. In this case, he shows him in this cloak.
It's the head.
It's the big head. And obviously because he was, I guess, it was
big
a
giant
thinker.
head.
It was a writer. It's all in his brain. And again, it was a sculpture that caused a problem because it was considered to be too ugly. And so it was rejected. It was commissioned, and I don't remember. I should remember where, but it was supposed to be put somewhere, and it was rejected. So Rodin said, "That's fine. I'll keep it and put it in the garden of this place of the Hotel Biron, where it still is to this day." But you can also see
Go look at it, and
the
you tell us
bust
if
that
you
he
think
did
it's
of Balzac. But he prepared for this sculpture by doing a bust in marble, a bust in plaster. I mean, it's fabulous, and it's fabulous because you get this. This is the fabulous genius of somebody like Rodin, is you get the essence of these people, of whatever it is he's trying to show in these works. Now, that doesn't mean that he doesn't also have beautiful, soft, gorgeous, sensuous pieces with very languid women and
the
couples,
kiss.
I mean, but forget the kiss. There are others that are more languid than that.
I see.
I mean, I think most people who have any information about Rodin know that he was also a seductor.
Yes.
And he had some very, very famous relationships with women. One of the most important, and of course one of the most tragic, being with a young sculptress named Camille Claudel, who became his assistant, who was a greatly gifted sculptress, who was his mistress for about 10 years or maybe a little bit more. And when he basically stopped being her lover, she started to go a bit crazy. And then because her family was a very upper class, very righteous Catholic family, her behavior was considered to be too scandalous. And so at the age of about 35, they actually put her into a psychiatric asylum, and she spent the rest of her life locked up. And it's a very tragic story. But she actually helped him with a lot of the pieces. And it was only in the recent past, with a lot of historians, art historians, doing work on the relationship that they had, that you now have in the building a couple of pieces that are marked Rodin and Camille Claudel. Because she did her own separate work, but this actually gives honor to the fact that she really helped
worked on these. And she's famous of her own right.
She's famous in her own right.
The museum used to have quite a few of her pieces.
Right.
I don't know if they still do.
Well, this is the deal. When I was there, which was just in January, they had just literally 3 days before reopened the main building.
Okay.
But the side exhibit space in the chapel part was closed. So I don't know
what's in there
or what will be in there.
Because I remember, and I will never forget this, it was so marvelous. She had made little sculptures of people gossiping. Tiny. They were the size of a finger. And you could see the expression on their face, like the ones that were listening, the ones that were talking, the ones that were scandalized, and it was called the gossip or something like that. Just with the title, you could just hear the whole conversation.
Yeah.
It was so beautiful. And it was a small little thing, but it was perfect.
Well, her sculpture was very humanistic, and considering the second half of her life being very tragic, she did continue to do some sculpture. And at the end, the last pieces show these old, withered away women. It's very real in the sense that it's very emotional and very down to earth, that kind of work, So it's also another aspect of his life, you see, because he had several women who were his muse, but he basically once he got enough out of them, he went on to somebody else, and he literally had mistresses like that until his death, literally, until the last of his life. But he was a great artist. And
do you know how he trained?
Yes, I was going to say this is stuff that I just did some research on, because of course that's not the part that I've always really considered to be the most important, but it's fascinating to find out. First of all, I didn't know that he was born in the 5th arrondissement in Paris, and he was excessively nearsighted. And apparently it handicapped him so much so that he did very poorly in school. He apparently was he could barely write correct French, and he learned to speak correctly, but he was very poorly educated. And so he left school quite early.
Because he couldn't see. He
couldn't see, and his family was poor.
I see. Okay.
So at the age of 12, his mother saw that he was very talented in drawing. Because he could see close up to do these little drawings and everything. So she sent him to be an apprentice in a little school that was for training people to do drawings and things like that. And he discovered the various different techniques of art that way. And he was introduced for the first time in his life to sculpture through clay, through working with his hands and molding and kneading clay and things like that. And he apparently loved it. And so he decided that he was going to try and work very hard to see if he could get admitted to the Fine Arts School of Paris, which still to this day is the hardest art school to get into in the country. And interestingly enough, he passed the part of the exam that had to do with drawing, but he didn't pass the part that had to do with sculpture. Well, I mean, it's very often the second or third place person who winds up being the best one of all, not the first place. And so what happened was, because obviously, this is we're talking the 1860s, he had to go and get some kind of work. His family decided that he should apprentice with various sculptors. And so he went to work as an assistant for a number of years in various studios, and he learned all the different techniques of three-dimensional work.
Did he attend the art school?
No.
Oh, no, okay.
No, never.
They flunked him, okay.
No. He never went back to any official formal school training of any kind.
Okay.
He learned by doing, and he learned by working with a bunch of different artists, none of whom are famous. I haven't heard of any of them, and I'm not the world's expert, but none of them are really famous today. But he literally worked in lots of different ateliers.
But they taught him the ropes.
They taught him all the ropes.
Technical stuff.
Exactly.
Because you need that. I mean, if you can't, if you're going to break everything that you make because you're banging at it wrong or something, then... Yeah.
I mean, he learned techniques of working with stone, working with creating casts of plaster, working with bronze eventually. And so by the time he's in his late 20s, he starts creating work. Now, nobody really makes a big deal of the artwork that he has until he's in his early 30s. And then a couple of people, obviously these are the days when if you were in the milieu of art, people came to where you were producing your artwork and they would look at it. This is how it worked. And so finally, a couple of people who were collectors saw a couple of his pieces and bought them. And it literally was from that point on that he started to sell his work.
I can't imagine how they wouldn't have just seen it right away.
Except that, yes, but you have to...
Well, maybe he hadn't developed his signature style yet.
But yes and no. There were two things. First of all, a lot of the small pieces he did because, like with many painters at the time, he did things that he could sell. So he did a lot of portraits, a lot of women's portraits, a lot of portraits because the busts were pieces that people would buy. But the other thing is he was against the academic way of painting, the old-fashioned way of painting, of sculpting. And so his idea of sculpture was very raw. And a lot of people, this is the issue in all art at a moment in history when it is the art that is being done. And some people see it as interesting new art, and other people see it as horrible, ugly stuff because they're used to what was done in the past. Nothing... It's something
the same today.
It's the same all the time. And when he was doing his work...
Except that today some of it is really awful.
You see. No. But that's the same thing they said 150 years ago.
Some of the stuff.
See, you have to keep that in mind, that at every age...
Yeah.
There were
I hear you, but...
A lot of people, when they looked at Rodin's work, they just thought it was ugly. That's all they thought. They thought it was ugly and it was poor taste. And it's
I can't fathom that.
Because you're looking at work that was done 150 years ago. You have to think about that.
Yeah,
okay?
yeah.
And it's a big difference, 150 years. And what happens is that American sensibility is not the same as French sensibility when it comes to work.
Right.
Some of his first works were bought by Americans and English people. When in 1875, he's 35 years old, he takes his huge trip that lasts about 6 months or more to Italy. Mm-hmm. And he comes back having seen all of the work by Michelangelo and all of these, and Bernini, and all of the sculpture, all of the architecture, all of the painting, and it changes him for life. And he goes and begins to do these massive pieces expressing his own internal feelings. Right. And by the time he's in his early 40s, he's famous. And this is when he has the beginning of his big atelier and young people coming to work with him. This is at the age of 44. He meets Camille Claudel, who comes to work with him, and she's 19 years old.
Wow.
And she comes to work with him because he is the master of sculpture at this point, of modern contemporary sculpture.
Yeah.
In other words, what we're talking about is, this is in the 1880s. This is the time of Monet. This is the time of breaking with tradition, breaking with rules, and trying new ideas in sculpture as well as in painting.
Yeah.
And, of course, he also, and this is probably because he had that in him anyway, he has a lot of confidence in himself. So he no longer doubts what he is doing. And that is, of course, what happens. It becomes this kind of roller coaster thing. This steamroller kind of
because
thing.
then once he finds his voice, he's just going to use his voice. Right. And yeah. Right.
So he has, I just because I wrote these down, because these are, of course, some of the most famous pieces, but just to give you an idea of the dates on them, okay? Mm-hmm. So the Doors from Hell were worked on originally from 1880 to 1890. But again, it wasn't cast until after his death in 1917.
Wow.
The Kiss is from 1882, which is in stone. It's in marble.
Yeah.
The Three Fates, or the Three Shadows, is 1886. He'd taken this figure off of the Doors of Hell and turned it into this magnificent sculpture.
Yeah.
The Burghers of Calais, the Burgomasters of Calais, is 1889.
Wow. So he was very, very productive.
The Thinker is 1903. He's already in his 60s. And two pieces that are absolutely gorgeous. One that is called the Danaide, which is a small piece, and it shows the Danaide is, I think, it's a Greek god that comes out of the waters.
Okay.
It's a small piece. It's absolutely exquisite, made out of
I don't remember that
out
one.
of marble. It's 1889, and he says it's basically dedicated to Michelangelo, right? The Walking Man, which is one of the pieces that I love, and is inside, not outside, and it's made of bronze, is 1907.
Okay.
A piece called The Cathedral, which is hands that is magnificent, made, and it's 1905. No, excuse me, 1908. And in
between, he probably produced a whole bunch of other things.
A whole bunch of other things.
These are the ones that we know of.
These are the ones. And Balzac, going back a little, is 1893.
Yeah.
So he worked until his death.
Yeah.
He died. In 1916, he had, I don't know actually if it was a heart attack or some kind of
AVC?
An AVC, some kind of,
So that's a stroke.
A stroke. He had something, and so he wrote his will, and this is when he decided that it was time to organize everything so that people would know where. Originally, he decided where he wanted everything placed in the building and in the parks and everything else. And so, of course, I think it put him to rest in a sense, because it was very soon after that, in 1917, that he actually died.
Okay. And where is he buried?
He's buried in Meudon.
Okay.
He's buried in Meudon. And he's buried next to this woman named Rose, who became his mistress when she was 20 and he was 24.
Huh.
Now, he married her in 1917.
Oh, so towards the end of his life. At the end of his life.
Months before. First she died, and then 6 months later he died.
Oh, wow.
And he married her for the simple reason that she had stayed faithful to him through all of those years with all the mistresses, with everything else. And so as a gift to her, at the very last minute, when they were both old, he married her, and they're buried together in Meudon.
Okay, well, that's kind of romantic in a way.
It's kind of romantic, except that...
I mean, it's awful what he did, but...
Well, I mean, the fact is...
It's for her to decide.
It's also that this is the way people, and especially artists, did do things in those days. But he was... he had one child with her that he never officially recognized, even though... he had the child when they were both in their 20s. I mean, that was the only child he ever had. And he never...
Is that right?
Yeah. But he did marry her. It's very strange because at the very, very end. So he's buried in Meudon.
Yeah, there are a lot of people like that who are just complicated.
Yep.
It's hard to admire everything about them, but definitely his sculpture, I mean, for me, it's amazing.
It's amazing.
It's the best I've ever seen.
And it really, I think that there are two things about his work. One is that it's filled with passion. Mm-hmm. And also there's an energy, the energy of the movement of his hands, the energy of the force of whatever it is. But then when you go inside the building and you see the collection is fabulous, and you see a lot of the small pieces that are very refined, and you can see that he can also do that at the same time. He is one of the most incredible sculptors.
How long do you think you should spend?
2 hours.
2 hours.
Yeah, I think now that they've redone the inside, I'd say a minimum 2 hours. But that's if you this is not painting. This is all sculpture. Okay.
Yeah.
But the inside now is fabulous, and if you take the time to look at everything, the last 2 or 3 rooms have. I posted a couple on my Facebook page. On walls, they have molds of all the hands and all the feet. One side is on one side is hands, on the other side is feet, on the other, and then the third side is a circular room. Are torsos from various sculptures that he did.
Right.
And then the last 2 rooms have his own collection. He has Greek vases. He has work from the ancient Greeks. He has work from the Renaissance. His own taste in art.
Yeah.
It's very, so if you really have an inclination to really look at everything closely, and if you do the inside very carefully and then do the park, you have a good 2 hours at least of being in this museum.
Maybe 3. But probably not much more than that.
No, definitely not. And it's really on a lovely day. I've been there in the autumn. I've been there in the springtime. I've been there in the winter. If you have the chance to sit out in the garden, there are benches everywhere. You can take pictures outside, of course, all that you want.
But not inside, maybe?
Not inside.
Yeah.
You can take pictures without flash inside.
Oh, that's all right.
And then
you
can actually,
camera.
I mean, I have no particular reason to say this other than I think it's delightful. This little outdoor, an indoor-outdoor cafe that's in the park. It's very lovely.
That was nice.
It's a very nice thing to do. Yeah. It's gorgeous. And it's a good half day visit, I'd say.
And personally, I would say honestly, if you give me the choice, go to Orsay or go to the Rodin Museum, I would go to the Rodin Museum.
Well, you're a real sculpture person.
I loved it.
You love sculpture.
I really love it.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, one of the things I like the best in the Orsay Museum is the bottom
with
all the sculpture.
Right.
I think that's just amazing. So for me, it would be a no-brainer. Even first time in Paris, I would go.
I wouldn't say that because I think it depends on.
Exactly, it depends.
You have to, but I think that is it's a jewel of a museum.
Yeah,
it's a gorgeous way of spending a half a day, and it also, once you are out of the museum, you are in a magnificent neighborhood.
Yeah,
and it's gorgeous to walk around. Just to give you an idea of really elegant Paris, of the Paris of the 18th century, of the gorgeous mansions and things like that. You can also, from there, actually walk to Orsay if you're a good walker. Or you can do, if you're up to doing 2 big things in the same day, you can literally go around the corner, across the boulevard, and visit Les Invalides and the Napoleon's tomb.
Yeah.
And that's a full day if you do the 2 things.
Yeah, if you do the 2, yeah.
And we could talk about that another time. I mean, I have my
it is
ins and outs about that. It's complicated, but it's a lovely, beautiful part of Paris.
Yeah,
and it's just a great thing to do.
Yeah. All right, folks, you're going to have to go to that museum too.
Yeah. It's open every day of the week except Monday.
Right.
10 to 5, Wednesday nights till quarter to 9.
And I suppose that they have added decent bathrooms and all of that. And
yes.
handicapped access and things like that.
Absolutely. Everything is now up to date. So you have access in every sense of the word.
Do they have stuff in English?
Yes, they do.
Oh, good.
Yes, it's Rodin, as I mentioned, is a sculptor whose work was very soon in his career collected by Americans. And so a lot of Americans go to visit the museum. So all the brochures and the books, everything is in English.
You have a choice.
You have a choice.
That's really good.
Yes.
Really good. Bravo.
We can say bravo to Auguste Rodin.
Oh, yeah. His work was amazing. I'm not sure about the guy.
Well, but that's true of a lot of those artists,
Yeah, maybe.
I mean, one of the few who wasn't like that was Monet, believe it or not. But then, whatever.
What were you going to say?
I was going to say that as long as they didn't do anything onerously horrible to the outside world, which, could be the case of an artist too. I mean, he wasn't, they say Caravaggio was a bit of a petty criminal and had some very strange things happen in his life. But, in this case, Rodin just was a womanizer. I mean, that was pretty much it.
And, if it was okay by the women, I don't see why I should object. It's their problem, not mine.
Made beautiful sculpture.
Yeah, absolutely. That's for sure. Okay. Thank you, Elyse.
You are welcome.
Yes, that was awesome. Again.
She's going to go back right away up and see it. It's gorgeous now. I really have to say.
Well, that's one of the reasons why I was asking if you could touch, because next time I'm in Paris, I'm probably going to be with a blind person.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm thinking, museum. I've never gone to a museum with a blind person.
Right.
But if he could touch.
I don't think you can, though.
Yeah.
I don't think you can. But I don't know. I'm not sure how that works.
Yeah. I mean, there are some museums that are where they have dedicated stuff for that purpose. Right. So.
But I have to say, I mean, I've been to the Rodin Museum many times. Honestly, I'd say, let's say over the last 30 years, I've been there at least enough times to see the changes in the main building. Yeah. And this is fabulous because there was a point. The
renovation is beautiful.
There was a point at which I didn't want to go into the building anymore. It was musty. It made no sense. It was not very comfortable. And now I'm very happy with what they did personally.
Excellent. So, that's great.
I give it my recommendation.
Okay. I know they have been waiting for that.
That's what they've been waiting for,
and they as they should.
They should, right?
All right, everybody.
Bye.
Bye. Au revoir. Before I close out the show today, I want to say thank you to all of you who have written new reviews on iTunes. Let me read a few of them because those are tremendously helpful, and I want you to feel how much I appreciate this. Reviews in iTunes are vital because it helps other people find the show. And you're probably like me. You probably don't buy anything anymore without checking out the reviews. And people don't even listen to a podcast without checking out the reviews anymore. We're crazy about reviews. And so when you write one for us, they get seen and it really helps us. So somebody called Etchi wrote, "Great listening prior to my trip. So informative." Well, that's what we try to do. We try to be informative. Rod says, "I really look forward to these weekly podcasts. They help prep me for an amazing week in Paris. Great advice on where to go, what to possibly skip." And yeah, if you only have a week, you need to skip some things, lots of things. And history and culture. Thank you very much, Rod. VJ Monterey wrote, "I just listened to the Versailles episode and got great information on history, details, and how to structure our Versailles day." Oh, this is funny. I said it two different ways there. I said Versailles, French way, and then Versailles, the American way. There was another review, a little older one, where I got chewed out for saying things the American way. You know what? Sometimes I say it the French way, sometimes I say it the American way. I'm French. I can do it. I can do what I want. But the truth is, we aim to be understood. And so it's good to mix it up sometimes. And I'm not saying it the American way because I don't want to say it the French way. So, it gave us details of how to structure our Versailles Day. Get there by 10 a.m. It was a Saturday when they went. Do the gardens, including rowing in the lakes. Then enter the palace at 1 p.m. and leave to catch the Eiffel Tower at sunset. Wow, what a resource. Glad my wife found it, so now we have time to listen to all 99 episodes. Love you, ladies. Thank you very much, VJ. You might not need to listen to all 99 right away, but it's up to you. We love fans. It's great. Somebody else called Furious Seller Major Bug says, I'm planning a trip to Paris and I have been binge listening to this show. It's entertaining and informative. Check it out. Thank you very much. And then the last one is Bella Mizzidino. Love that name. She says, excellent podcast about Paris and France. Wish I had this podcast to listen to before my visit to Paris several weeks ago. This is so pleasant and informative. My friend Debbie R is going to Paris probably this year, and I know she'll enjoy listening to these podcasts in advance. I'm going to France this summer, and I'm going to listen to all of those podcasts as I am planning my itinerary. Thank you for this. Well, thank you for the review, and if you would also like to leave a review for the show, look at your device that you're listening to the show on. Maybe it's a telephone or an iPad or something. And on the show notes, there is a link that you can tap on, and it will take you right to where you need to leave your review. It'll save you a few steps, and it'll make it fast. You don't really need to write a whole ton. I mean, 1 or 2 sentences is enough. So thank you, and keep listening and keep sharing the show with your friends who are going to France, because I'm sure with all the listeners we've got, all of you know a lot of people who are going to France soon, so do share. Just one more note. I asked Elyse about being able to touch the art, and she said no, that normally you don't do that. Well, there are provisions for blind and sight impaired persons. It's all described on their website. They do something they do many things right to welcome sight impaired persons. But one of the things that they do that's amazing and wonderful is that they give gloves to the blind so that they can touch the art. And they even give them special booklets in Braille and with tactile stuff in large print to help them along their visit. Awesome. Awesome. Thank you, Rodin Museum. I already loved you. I love you even more. Most new listeners of this show found out about it through a friend or a blog post or a mention on TripAdvisor or on Facebook. If you're someone who has told someone else about Join Us in France, thank you so much. It really means a lot that you would do that for me. Keep telling your friends, and if you happen to write something about the show, please send me a link or tag me somehow so I can share it and express my gratitude. And if you're listening to the show on your phone, you can see a lot of useful links right there from your phone. Tap on them and be taken to the right page without any more effort than that. If all you see is the show logo, then tap on it, and underneath you'll see a link to the show notes, another link to the Support Us on Amazon page where we can earn a small commission for every purchase you make on Amazon, whether it has something to do with Join Us in France or not. Also, a link to leave us a rating and review on iTunes, and a link to leave a voicemail for the show using SpeakPipe. And all you have to do if you're on your phone is just click on the link and start talking. Ask your question or share your feedback. Thank you so much.